and I'm the chair for the this first afternoon session. So we have three presentations by Dr. Daphne Ma at HKBU, by Dr. Kris Hartley from the Education University of Hong Kong, and by Dr. Dionysios Stivas of HKBU. So the order in which you appear on my screen is going from the left is Daphne first. So Daphne, are you happy to present first?
Yes, sure. So
Okay.
good afternoon, and thanks, Chef, for introducing me. I'm very pleased to make this presentation, which we plan to complement the presentation that our team made in the morning. In the morning, we talk about our pilot cyclone case study, and in this section, I'd like to continue and bring in the perspective of co-construction and local participation in smart energy projects. And specifically, this is a topic about building data trust with and for smart energy communities in Hong Kong. This is the outline. First, I will share with you some key concepts that underpin our analysis. And then secondly, I will use our ongoing large-scale 3-year project on smart energy communities in Hong Kong to discuss what are the potentials or opportunities for us to build data trust with and for the community. This is just a snapshot showing you how we kind of evolve from our cyclone pilot project, which is part of Professor Koh's Smart City project that we completed last year for data collection. And then now we are scaling up it to a full-scale 3 years project, which is funded by RGC Research Impact Fund. And we actually are recruiting 600 households in 4 communities in Hong Kong. Now, let me share with you a couple of key concepts that are very relevant to our analysis. First key concept is that sustainable energy transition is a citizen-centered concept. From the graphic diagram on the left-hand side, you see that now when we need to evolve from the traditional centralized fossil fuel-based energy system to a more sophisticated energy system, where, as you can see, that we can integrate renewable energy into the system, and then the power sector would be more decentralized. So we see that energy transitions is a long-term social technological process that involves structural fundamental changes that affect generation, distribution, storage, and use of energy. And basically, that such fundamental changes would involve 2 major approaches. On the demand side, how we consume electricity; to the supply side, how we generate energy for our use. For the demand side, it is very relevant to smart development because the global trends are very extensive in terms of how consumers, we can become smarter with the support by the smart meters installation, smart sensors, and the use of mobile application like this one. And then with that, we can utilize the real-time data and supported by dynamic pricing. On the supply side, the smart grid will enable us to mainstream renewable energy. And then all these transitions have to be citizen-centered for a couple of important reasons. Number one is that the nature and scale of change that we need would require more than government or power companies can do. So involving public is not something that we just want to do good for the sake of being nice. It's a real genuine need for us to involve the public. And public perception, we see that is important because it can affect public acceptance of the adoption of new energy technology and even more ambitious energy policies. Say we are adopting carbon neutral goals around the world. Now, public trust is a major predictor of public acceptance. So these are why we argue that energy transition has to be a citizen-centered concept. The second concept is that smart consumers. Now you can, as I just mentioned the previous slide, smart energy transitions are supported or enabled by smart sensors and smart meters. These are the hardware part of it. But the software part of it is that you and I as consumers, we can become smarter because we can, with the tools and information, we now can be empowered and proactive in managing our energy use and conserve more energy. And so these are the smart consumers ideas. And we can not only save energy, but we can also produce electricity. So we come up with the concept of smart prosumers. We consume while we can also produce electricity. And things like that could take place at home or even at a larger scale in the community. The third concept is about community energy. More traditional way of developing renewable. In Hong Kong, you can see that quite a number of government-supported or utility-scale solar projects. But around the world, there are major trends that is more bottom-up, that is community-based way approach for developing renewable energy. And we see that the beauty or added benefits of community energy when we in contrast with the traditional government or utility-led renewable is that community can generate more social benefits. And in particular, about energy awareness and building a sense of ownership of the problems and the solutions. When people, we take more control of our energy production and consumption, we tend to have a stronger sense of ownership that climate impact is not only the problem for the global community or for the government. I myself have to do something with it. People start to have a stake in the present and future energy system. The fourth concept is about data trust. I shared these ideas with you in the morning, so I won't spend too much time on that now. I just want to emphasize that trust is very relevant to energy transition because for energy transitions, it is inevitably that we have to embrace uncertainty. So in other words, we have to accept we are to some extent vulnerable to the future. But the key is that how we can keep a positive expectation on such a situation. Okay, data trust is important, and these are the important dimensions of data trust that we have to care. Now, I'd like to move on to the empirical part with the use of our ongoing RIF projects. That I'd like to identify how three major opportunities for us to build data trust for and with communities in Hong Kong. But we also see that there are a couple of major challenges. So we reflect from our project team's experience that what are the good practices that we can introduce in order to address that sort of trust issue. This slide provides you a snapshot of our RIF project that Professor Cole and Darren, our collaborators, 4 communities. We are going to recruit 600 households. And the interesting part of the research is that we will combine big data analytics with smart meter installation and the mobile app use, and integrate that with deep engagement strategies. We have colleagues from the visual arts team, and then all together, our team will create 13 data sets. And my colleagues in the big data analytics field, they will do that sort of analysis. The opportunity for us to make good use of data, the first one is that we can see those big data-driven app-based energy tips could be developed by our team. That is important because it allows us to become more effective in catalyzing and incentivizing and sustaining household energy behavioral change. Big data, the the contribution from big data is that with the large volume, high speed analysis, we can improve the precision in analysis and prediction. So in other words, in this project, we are going to be able to identify the high impact behavior and who is doing what to save energy, or is on the other hand is wasting electricity use, or which behavior is the problematic area and at what time. But the challenge is that what data is being held and how and where it is secured and who can get access to it and how long it should be kept for and why is it necessary to collect it. Now, what we are trying to do in our research team is that we are trying to explore our own good practice for building trust in our project. Now, in the past last 6 months, which is the early stage of our project, we are working with the legal team at Hong Kong Baptist University to develop our own set of trust documents. Okay, these set of documents, there are 4 specific documents. We have a protocol with underpinning principles to guide the development of this set of protocol. The principles: number 1, consent driven; secondly, assurance of privacy protection; and thirdly, transparency; and fourth, ethical use of the data. So that is very relevant to what Dr. Kevin Ip mentioned this morning. Now, this set of 4 documents at university level, at the project level, and we developed an agreement with our service providers and also another one for census suppliers. We do take trust as the issue for our project because we see that trustworthiness has to be earned and maintained through ethical practices. Now, the second opportunity for us to build data trust in community is that building online and open access solar map through data sharing and partnership. One of our previous projects in this area is that we already developed a Hong Kong BU solar map. So we, with the GIS expertise in our department, we produced this online map, and we can tell households so how many solar panels can be installed on your building, and then how much electricity can be generated. And in Hong Kong, there are other parties that have developed other type of solar map, like this one developed by an NGO. Okay. Now, the challenge for this sort of initiatives is that this open data platform that aggregates existing disaggregated solar data with diverse ownership, okay, is very essential, but is lacking. Okay, so the big question for us is how to share data which have different ownership, okay, and how to make it open access while protecting privacy. Now, for our project team, we are exploring our good practice in this way. We are having a mini project which got the funding from part of the RIF and also an internal grant that we are applying, that we will develop a prototype of an open access energy map or online map, and we'll invite inputs from community, the public, NGOs, and the private sector. Because like some solar households, they have solar data, and from some schools which have solar on their school group job, they also have their own set of data. And some private companies, say solar installation companies, they also have their client solar data. So altogether, we hope to consolidate all these solar data sets through a multi-sectoral partnership. And we have already set up a task force in September, and we are working out more operational guidelines and kind of had manuals and some guiding instructions so that we can carefully develop our protocol for this project. And one specific example is that we, when we worked out this partnership with, for example, business sector, we are very cautious how to make sure that we our data will not be used for commercial purpose, and then we do uphold the principle of equal level of data sharing, and then so that the private sector would not be able to obtain more solar data than any other web users. So we are working also on these sort of principles. Now, the third opportunity for us to use data in communities that we can use big data to develop demand response program or new pricing system in Hong Kong, which specifically is about dynamic pricing. I won't go into too much about these details about the new pricing policies, but just one point is that whenever we introduce new pricing in anywhere in Hong Kong or in other cities, public tend to be very skeptical because no one wants to pay higher electricity bill. So public acceptance of this sort of pricing change is critical, but it's always a source of controversies in society. Now, the good practice for us is that we sense that it is important for us to take a trust-based approach for engaging the public in this sort of energy policy decision making. Our team developed a kind of conceptual framework that identified the key processes of trust building, and there are important uncertainty issues in the context of that specific city, in our case in Hong Kong. And then this is a list of uncertainties issues in energy transition that we can specify, from technological to institutional to organization and then to social issues. Now, one previous research, like my colleague Darren mentioned in the morning, we already found that the trust has been an issue in the Hong Kong context. There are important trust gaps in trust in information, trust in motive, trust in transparency, and trust in some specific stakeholders as well. Now, one possible approach for us to build trust through engagement is to adopt a kind of deliberative approach for public engagement. Deliberation has the essence of debate, dialogue, and compare alternative options of the energy future. Deliberate coding is a specific methodology that has been trademarked by a research team in Stanford, and that research team is our collaborators for a couple of projects already. So for deliberate coding, the essence of it is that it is a carefully designed engagement exercise that invites the general public to come forward to join small group discussion and expert panel section. But before that, a well-balanced briefing document has to be developed, and then we have to carefully conduct pre and post questionnaire to track the changes in public views. And another essence of deliberate coding is that we need to develop alternative energy scenarios, and for each scenarios we need to specify the benefits, cost, and risk so that we can facilitate our participants to discuss and compare and before they make informed decisions on their preference. So from our experience in previous project, we see that Hong Kong citizens, they need clear explanation to all these vulnerability issues and their relevance to their well-being. Now, to conclude, I just want to highlight that building data trust with and for community have many opportunities, at least in the context of Hong Kong. The challenges are many, and the first thing I think is extremely time-consuming, and it involves very nice combination of expertise. So all these are very time consuming, and it can be a challenge for research team and also for government or other stakeholders. But we see that multi-sectoral partnership would be key to success of such initiatives, because there are huge potential for data creation, data management through good partnership. And with this, I just want to highlight that our observation is that we see universities have a very unique role in facilitate these sort of desirable, possible, positive developments. In terms of leadership, how universities set the vision and drive changes. And universities still seems to be a trustworthy party at least in Hong Kong, when compare our sense is that when compared with the Hong Kong government or power company, people, those we met in the communities, they tend to find us quite trustworthy. And university, we have good hardware and software. I mean, students and teachers, software, hardware were quite good in both ways. So as a hub, we see that we do have some important enabling role in it. Okay, so with this, I like to end my presentation and look forward to our discussion later on today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Daphne. Absolutely fascinating. Move on now with the next presentation, which will be from Dr. Kris Hartley.
Okay, thank you very much. Roger, let me share my screen here. Please let me know if the screen is not able to be seen. I appreciate the invitation. Apologies for not being able to be a part of the proceedings earlier. I'm coming from Belgium, so I'm on a bit of a different time schedule here. But thank you for the interesting presentation, Daphne, as well. And I hope that what I present here can factor into some of our conversations today. I do a lot of work on the political and policy theory underlying technology and sustainability policy. But today I'm going to be presenting the results of some surveys that I've done recently in regards to public trust and in technology and smart cities in general, particularly within the Hong Kong context. So we talk about the notion of trust and political legitimacy of smart cities. We're drawing from, of course, a very rich literature on the matter of public trust in general and representation. We can narrow that down into public sector technology and the trust around that, and then more particularly the trust the public has in smart city projects. Vague as that term may be, there's a fair amount of research that's been done examining this at an empirical level. And what I've been doing most recently, and what I think is one of the most exciting areas that are emerging in STS, science and technology studies, smart city studies, et cetera, is kind of a critical theoretical approach to that, which is basically coming from the perspective of the idea that there are underlying power structures regarding the creation of policies for technology and the application of technology to public service delivery, et cetera, and that the way that these smart cities technologies perpetuate our thinking about solving policy problems somehow privileges or benefits a very long-running technocratic mindset, or we might say existing power structures that are dependent on that technocratic mindset for policymaking. So this is something that I think is emerging, but the problem there, of course, is that that is still remains to be highly theoretical argument, and there are not a lot of empirics around that. And I decided that I would try to bridge that gap a little bit by beginning to do surveys of the public in regards to what their perception of smart cities were. I'm not asking specifically about their views of the replication of power structures, but rather I'm the initial part of this work, the initial few years of this work, just kind of seeks to gather a bit of an overview on the public's view of smart city policy in general, and then to move forward with that. So I'm just outlining here a little bit of what my theoretical orientation to this is. And of course, we've seen a lot of very interesting and valuable research done, descriptive research done on the kind of the tools of the technology, the toys of the technology rather, and a lot of what we understand from it, at least from a political science or public policy or participatory or collaborative policy approach, piggybacks on that. And yet, and sort of what we know about the way the public interacts with the government extends from this kind of knowledge about the specific mechanics of smart city technologies. Where I'm saying to reverse the thinking is to begin with notions of power, replications of power, and then examine how those are reproduced or reinforced through smart city policies, through technocratic thinking in general, and also more generally through sustainability and other types of narratives that we've seen emerge in kind of the latest iteration of policymaking that we've seen. So this led me to the survey that I did in Hong Kong about a year and a half ago of 1,000 residents, and was published fairly recently. So what I'm talking here about is the idea that I want to examine what the public believes are sort of legitimacy of smart city policies, their trust in the privacy and security, and their feelings about the degree of participation that they are allowed to have in the policy making surrounding smart cities itself. So I'm looking at some of these specific questions. So how much do they agree or disagree? Primarily, this is Likert scale data that I've collected. And I'm looking at these dependent variables. The outcome variables is dependent, of course, on a wide variety of issues related to trust, the notion of info security, the willingness to sacrifice some degree of privacy, and then the belief that concerns are heard when Hong Kong's making smart city policies, and the desire to provide more input into that as determinants of their support of smart cities, or at least their support of Hong Kong's ambition to be a smart city, as expressed in numerous documents, including the Hong Kong budget speech and other Hong Kong plans to implement smart city policies. And then I've also added in kind of a put your money where your mouth is variable, and that is people's willingness to pay taxes then to support Hong Kong's ambition to be a smart city. A couple of control variables are simply the awareness of the concept of smart cities, and then also the government's responsibilities. This is kind of an ideological variable in the sense that, you know, do I believe that the government is responsible for improving my quality of life? So that brings back around this kind of ideological continuum where, on one hand, you know, people's lives are a product of their own efforts, and on the other hand, you know, at the very other extreme, it would be the responsibility of the government to provide for people and make sure that their lives are happy, or at least you know, safe, prosperous, and healthy, etc. So these are the kind of ideological variables that I try to control for in examining that. Now, in each of the following several slides, the left-hand side here, the one in black, is going to be the results of the Smart City Survey at hand, the one that I'd mentioned as part of the published work. The one on the right actually is brand new information. It's unpublished. I just took possession of this. I did the same survey in Singapore with 1,500 respondents, and this was done last year. And I took possession earlier this year of that data. So I haven't attempted to published that yet. I just haven't had time, and I also have not used it in any conference. So this is the first time I've seen it. So please don't cite at least what's on the right. But what's on the left is publicly available through the publication. But it's interesting to compare them, actually. So we see, for example, the idea that smart cities can provide a better quality of life. This is the public's general impression of what is the value of smart cities. You can draw from the public value triangle of more, et cetera, to see, you know, what does it add to people's quality of life, et cetera. And we see, you know, in both cases, general sort of positive notion of that. In Singapore, we see a little bit more of this kind of slopey curve, which indicates that, you know, there's the level of strong agreement is not quite as high as it is in Hong Kong, but also the level of neutrality as well. So we see just a slight majority here or at least slightly the highest percentage are neutral on that issue. But again, generally we see positivity in regards to that. Similar to aspire to be a smart city and to embrace technology. So again, on the fourth one, the previous one was the idea that smart cities in general have good potential to bring public value, and this question is, my city specifically should embrace this. So we would predict fairly similar responses on this as well. If there was strong belief in the concept of smart cities, then that would naturally follow that we would see some expectation that the city should adopt that and should become that. And we see even a little bit more sanguine on the Hong Kong side. So the highest answer, very agree here. Singapore, again, positive, generally positive, but maybe a little bit more reserved here, more sort of the highest return on agree. Then we see the put your money where your mouth variable is, the variable including I'm willing to pay taxes. Then we see it quite flipped. In this case, people are less willing to pay taxes in general to support these types of programs. Singapore seems rather neutral, but clearly in comparison seems just a bit more receptive to the notion of public resources going towards smart cities. So this is where actually we begin to see some of the political side of it. So the left side, I've just included the sort of 5 questions here, as I said before. I trust the technology. I believe that my info is kept secure by the government. I'm willing to sacrifice some amount of privacy for the greater good in regards to smart cities. My concerns are heard when my government makes smart city policies, and then I wish to provide more input into smart city policy. So I've organized both of these charts in exactly the same way, and you could read them individually or in comparison. Again, we see not a whole lot of positivity on this, and in the sense particularly concerns heard, there doesn't seem to be a lot of indication that people feel like they're being heard, their concerns are heard when smart city policies are made. Certainly, as we could have expected, not many are very willing to sacrifice privacy. And similarly, there's not a lot of confidence that, relative confidence that the info is secure and sort of trust in the technology. We see really quite different in Singapore. And again, Singaporeans tend to, if they're positive, they tend to choose the 4 rather than the 5. Here's maybe a bit reserved, but what we see here is really quite remarkable. Level of trust in the technology, trust that the info is secure, willingness to provide input, and then the 2 least are concerns heard, but still higher than that of Hong Kong. And then, of course, willingness to sacrifice for privacy, still notably higher than Hong Kong. So really quite interesting findings here. Again, I just produced the graphics on the right within the last day or 2, so these certainly deserve a sort of a deeper dive, but I'm just providing the data for you here as a matter of discussion. Then a couple of other issues that I looked at in the survey, and this has not been published yet either, but it was in the same survey, I'm publishing this part of it later, is the type of quality of life factors. So it's not just, can smart cities improve my quality of life, but I drew these factors from a smart city report, I believe by KPMG, that had organized, different types of government activities that intersect with smart cities. And again, same sort of 5-point Likert scale with agree and very agree being at the top there. So what's notable here, and it just kind of tells a story that you might already suspect, is that there are certain areas in which the public is aware of technological intervention in service delivery, and that is primarily within mobility and transportation, with various kinds of apps. And thus we see that we could have added, health here, and it would have been interesting to see we could have added the COVID aspect to health, and I'll talk a little bit later about this, the Leave Home Safe app. But we see that those are the 2 that the public seem to perceive the use of smart cities technologies as potentially greatest enhancement in quality of life. At least for buildings, again, we can see smart buildings and things of this nature, but it's either the public doesn't believe that, or it's just not quite as visible or apparent to them. Energy, the environment, and education are the ones that are rounding that out. So again, we could see this as an indication of what the public is aware of in terms of where smart city initiatives are being applied or used. And then this is very interesting here, governance factors improved by smart cities. So, can the technology, the smart cities technology, do a better job of X, a better job of public participation, enhancing transparency, public services, government communication to citizens, and perhaps the other way around as well. And then notion of fairness. So we see, again, public service delivery, more technical sides of it, but citizens appear relatively less aware that smart cities technologies can improve the softer aspects of governance, participation, public participation, transparency, communication, and fairness. So I think that's kind of the next frontier, maybe the next discussion to have about smart cities is it just something that remains within the realm of sort of material public service delivery, or can it improve our governance overall? Can it improve those types of things? So I think those are questions that the smart cities literature and smart cities practice is probably going to be pointing towards in the coming years or maybe decades. Just some of the regression results here, because I did regression analysis on this. And again, I had told you earlier what the dependent variables were and the explanatory variables. So this is aspire to be a smart city. We see positive connection with trust in technology, info secure, et cetera. These are all fairly predictable. What I noticed, however, was quite interesting and probably deserving of a little bit more either survey work or interview work is the negative sign on education here. So as education level goes up, then the attitude that Hong Kong should aspire to be a smart city goes down. So it's significant only in 3 of the 5 models here, but it does raise a question whether there may be sort of an informed skepticism kind of effect. Again, not entirely surprising, as there is certainly literature that would indicate that higher levels of education can be associated with more skepticism, especially if that level of education increases knowledge of government workings, et cetera. Then when I add the variable of tax, so as the dependent variable, then we see income level picking up some of the significance from education. And now, again, we see the negative signs and significance in 4 out of 5 of the models, indicating that people with higher levels of income aren't necessarily going to support or support their tax money being used or to pay more taxes to develop smart city technologies. Again, that may be an indication. I have to dig down deeper. It could be an indication that smart city technologies appear or seem to these respondents to be benefiting maybe lower income people, et cetera. Maybe people with lower incomes observe smart cities policies as having a greater impact on their daily lives than people with higher incomes, perhaps. Maybe people with higher incomes are less dependent on public services, et cetera. But again, to be tested, to be further developed. And this wasn't even the initial focus of it, but actually I found my control variables or my non-interest variables even more interesting than the results I found from the variables of interest, which is a little bit of a methodological lesson there. And again, just checking time. Okay, we're at 8:40. Thank you. Pardon me. So I just finished a survey and have not written it up on public trust in the Leave Home Safe app. So I wanted to try to combine technology with the pandemic. And so this is some preliminary findings from that. So again, I had to do some initial surveys on what people felt the government was doing in regards to the pandemic in general as kind of control variables for what their impressions are about the app. Now, the challenge here is that the public sentiments about the government's ability to handle the pandemic are going to be highly, highly dependent on what's happening that day and the news that day, case counts and closures and all of the mitigation factors, et cetera. So at the time when this survey was conducted, we would see that the government has not got a lot of confidence from the public in terms of how it's handled the spread of COVID-19. I wish I had the funding to be able to conduct these surveys on a weekly basis, because I'm sure we would find differences from week to week. Here's the question. I support the use of Leave Home Safe app. So we generally see here that people don't support Leave Home Safe app to fight the spread of the virus. Leave Home Safe app is effective in stopping the spread of the virus. So you've got level of support, and then you've got just the belief in the effectiveness of the Leave Home Safe app itself. Again, strongly disagree. And these, I've got the number of respondents down here. So it was over 5,000. And I believe it was the Pori at HKU, I think, that did this survey, or that I contracted to do this survey. Trust the Leave Home Safe app with my personal data? Nope, still strongly disagree. So consistent with my previous findings. So we see there tends to be some, the same types of patterns we saw in distrust are bleeding over, of course, and predictably into the Leave Home Safe app. I've got more data on this as well, but again, it's not been written up, and in the interest of time, I can't go into further detail. So I took some of these findings and just kind of at the end of this presentation, to zoom out a little bit, did this op-ed for SCMP talking about how we must pay attention to the governance aspects of smart cities. It's not just about the bits and the cables, but it's about recognizing that the development of technology exists within a social and political system that isn't without sort of its own political problems, and that the government, and any government, sort of can't simply buy their way out of distrust with shinier and showier mechanisms and smart city technology, but in fact, there is no substitute for the toilsome work and the gritty work of connecting with people in whatever ways that are appropriate. Thus, this was sort of a general argument that I made. And then just finally kind of zooming out, this coincides with sort of the theoretical work I've been doing on wicked problems. And initially, I came to the notion of wicked problems earlier than I was looking at smart cities. But what I found was a very interesting combination of factors that allowed me to look at smart cities as a pathway to sort of technocratizing very complex public policy problems, reducing them to measurabilities. And of course, this is fraught with challenges, because obviously these measurabilities don't necessarily capture everything that's going on in society. We see the street light effect here, the idea that we're only looking for the thing that we're trying to find where the daylight is, or where the sun, where the street light is, that if you had dropped your keys across the street, but continued to look over here where the street light was, you'd never find your keys. Do we have that same effect with the collection of data and the use of data for policy making and smart cities, et cetera? That what are the factors that we're overlooking? And that just because we're able to collect the data, are we able to interpret it and apply it? Just because we have the information doesn't mean our answers are necessarily all going to add up either. And we could look at examples like India's 100 smart cities as a very political type of project that would appear to check a lot of very important boxes, livability, walkability, et cetera, but yet we could still bring a critical perspective to the policy making around that. We could say, well, there are a lot of resources that have gone into the bits and the cables, and they're all in the name of sustainability, et cetera, and yet we can see underlying power structures in that, the neoliberal state being reproduced, the idea that there is a power play in regards to the relationship between the business community and public policy, whose interests are being served and whose interests are being erased or omitted. So this kind of techno fetish here, the idea that there's always a technological solution, or that there's an app for that, as the phrase goes, represents a kind of reductionist approach to problem framing And it will be interesting to see in the coming years whether the public responds positively to that. This is my final slide, and this is something that I've explored not only in this article, but in my book with Glenn Cooker that just came out this year. And that is called Disrupted Governance. I should have had a link to that, but I don't. And it's the notion that, of course, we're in a period of epistemic liminality or transition where we have some old ways of thinking, technocratic ways of thinking, and we're overlaying that with new technologies to try to make it even more efficient. But we have to ask ourselves if the technology is actually compelling us to do the wrong things but better, the wrong things but faster, the wrong things but cheaper. So really, when we talk about the public's perceptions of quality of life, et cetera, we have to be asking deeper questions, and the use of technology in smart cities is not always going to sort of gloss over that as effectively as some people might hope. So anyway, thank you very much. I know that gets into a lot of different issues, but I wanted to sort of represent what my perspective was on that matter, and also to bring some empirics to what has been a highly theoretical discussion until now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kris. Got into a lot of fascinating details, so that's terrific. Thanks a great deal.
Finally, so as you can see from the PowerPoint, I'm going to present you the findings from the focus groups. First, I'm going to discuss what is focus groups about. Why do we use focus groups in this research? How did we select the 4 focus groups, and what questions did we make to them? And then I'm going to present the findings. So, focus groups exercises, debatably, they cannot stand as independently as sources to write a paper or to base your research, but they are very good to complement surveys, like the big survey we had for this project, or interviews. So they can play an important role between the survey and the purposive interview saying goal. We follow the less rigid and structured approach of focus groups that is followed in the social sciences. We encourage the participants to talk to each other. We had 43 participants split in 4 groups, as I will explain in a few minutes. And they were talking to each other with the help of a moderator, 3 moderators actually, and with the help of some questions. We pose some questions to them. And this is the approach that we developed in this exercise. Virtually all the focus groups, they draw some conclusions about the population of interest. They reflected more or less the population of interest that we had in the survey. We had different age range from 20 to 40, 45 years old. Most of them were of higher education. Half of them had different background, residential background. Some of them had just arrived from mainland China, so they had completely different perspectives about trust, about governance, and about the smart city than the other participants that they were residing in Hong Kong for many years. Yes, so they reflected more or less the population of the survey. Older and younger individuals, men and women, yes, they were equally men and women, and these elements were also adopted in our research. So the primary aim of the focus group and the primary aim of the focus group exercise that we conducted on the 8th of December of 2021 was to describe and understand the meanings and interpretations of these selected groups of people to gain understanding of smart city, trust in smart city. What do they think about smart city? What do they think about Hong Kong as a smart city? Who do they trust more to develop, implement, and operationalize smart city elements and smart city tools. So going further, we developed some insights, and we saw the similarities and the differences of the understandings held by different people, and we saw how these understandings differed between different social groups. We had in-depth discussions, and the in-depth discussion is based on the fact that the focus groups, they involved a relatively small number of people, 10 to 13 these people in each one of these focus groups, from a specific area of interest. Interactive, the discussions were interactive. We let the participants communicate and discuss with each other, and we intervene mostly to bring back the conversation into line when sometimes they were turning the conversation to smart cities in the United States, for example. We use moderators, 3 moderators, me, Professor Cole, and Mr. Calvin Lai. And the participants, they share the social and cultural experience about the particular topic of smart cities. How these focus groups worked. We had a moderator's guide. We introduced what the project and the questions. We stated the basic rules, and then we informed them about short questions that were followed also by answers, short or larger in a certain instance. So 4 specially convened focus groups, each lasting for around 1 hour, accompanied the survey and purported interview sample. Our survey had a sample of 808 participants, and we interviewed also 25 people. So these were the 4 focus groups. The first one was comprised of young Chinese students that had recently moved from China to Hong Kong, 10 participants. The third group comprised of civil servants, some working for the police, some for customs, some for the health authority. The fourth one comprised of people who were working in the private sector, and we had also group 2, that was a mixed group. A group mixed with different age, different gender, and different background. The main categories of questions, we started by asking them about the adjectives, how would they describe Hong Kong, without bringing any hint about smart city. Then we asked them if they ever heard Hong Kong as a smart city, being the concept Hong Kong smart city. After that, we asked them to define smart city. What do they think that a smart city is? Then to elaborate on the benefits and the risks of smart city. And then on the second round of questions, we focused on trust in government, trust in local or foreign companies, trust in this application of smart governance of Hong Kong, Live Home Safe, I'm a Smart, and Lamppost. Connection between trust, government, and technologies. And then recommendations to Hong Kong government, sustainability and smart city, and lessons from Shenzhen. Now going to the findings, because we do not have much time. The first question, as we said, was about the adjectives of Hong Kong. How would they describe Hong Kong? And here we see that some possibly mainland Chinese young students, fresh arrivals to Hong Kong, described it as capitalist as opposed to socialist, like China. Expensive, for some of them Hong Kong was very expensive. For others it was traditional, stressful, fast and busy and stressful, they go alongside. Financial, for some others it was touristic or a food paradise. International, resilient, democratic for some of the private sector, developed from those of the government, not surprisingly, direct. So mainly we saw that most of the groups, they described it as financial, international, metropolitan, stressful, or touristic. it is interesting here to see that nobody described Hong Kong as modern, as technological. They didn't think Hong Kong as a smart, technological, more or modern or convenient city. And then the next question was, of course, if they ever heard Hong Kong as a smart city. The mainland Chinese students, young students, they never heard Hong Kong as a smart city, as opposed to having heard many times the Chinese cities, other mainland Chinese cities to be mentioned as smart. And they brought examples from various first, second, or third tier Chinese cities. The mixed group, the majority of the mixed group participants, they had never heard of Hong Kong being described as a smart city. Some of them, possibly because it was a mixed group and some of them were also local Hong Kong people, they had heard Hong Kong as a smart city. They even knew about the smart city blueprint. The civil servants, as you can imagine, they all were very well informed about the smart city blueprint and also about Hong Kong as a smart city. Those working in the private sector, most of them knew about Hong Kong as a smart city, and they even knew about the cyberport and some specific smart city elements like the lampposts. How would they define smart city? That was also very interesting. From the mixed group, we had some, not Hong Kong as a smart city, but smart city in general. They paralleled smart city and city governance with algorithms, the government using algorithms to facilitate governance of the people. Some of them from mainland China, from the mixed group and from the private sector, they thought that contactless transactions and robot services were relevant to smart city. Others mentioned the e-health system from the private sector. I think some of them were working in the health sector, but in private hospitals. Most of them from all the focus groups, but especially from mainland China, related smart city with e-payment. And one of the reasons that they consider Hong Kong as not being smart was because Hong Kong does not use WeChat Pay and Alipay. They are not familiar with the e-payment facilities and tools that Hong Kong uses. So e-payment was very important for them, to go in the bus, to go in every shop and be able to pay with a QR code. This doesn't happen in Hong Kong, according to them. Others related smartness with e-vehicle. E-vehicle also was connected with a new energy and with the protection of the environment. These were all connected with sustainability, as we will see later. From the mixed group, convenience and improvement of life was also emphasized as an element of smartness. Internet of the Things was mentioned by many of them. Mobile applications, utilization of mobile applications too. Online government services, smart ID, solutions of traffic jam. And here we saw that some from mainland China, they had no issue with the government taking photos or surveilling their number plate on the car for as long as this will allow them to pass very fast from the toll posts, or this will allow the traffic lights to be green all the way towards their destination if they go from one city to another. QR code was also emphasized, and the utilization of urban space. That's also interesting. Some consider Shenzhen as smarter than Hong Kong because they have underground space, nothing electronic, nothing technological, but they have underground space and they can use this underground space to free space above the ground. So this was considered as smart for some of them. Now, benefits and risks. From the mixed group, they consider some of them that smartness and smart city helps the elderly and those with disabilities. Interesting, some from mainland China thought that if in the traffic lights, in the pedestrian crossings, there are cameras that will record the face of those who jaywalking, who pass with a red light, and then name and shame them. This will make the citizens not cross with red light and will make the society more civilized. Convenience was, of course, mentioned by all of them, and efficiency. Friendly environment was a benefit of smart city, and this again was connected with the e-vehicles. A new way of power for the authority. For most of the people, this would be a little bit scary, but for some of them, it is good to have smart city elements and smart city tools in the hands of the authorities, in the hands of the government, give them more power, because the government, for some of them, always wants the benefits for the people and always cares for the people, as opposed to the private companies who only care about profits. Transparency also, but top-down transparency, imagining the government only using smart tools and smart technologies, smart elements, only to give information, to offer information to the citizens. But again, I think this was mentioned in the mixed group from some participants from mainland China. There was no discussion about bottom-up transparency, increasing the abilities and the capabilities of the citizens to influence governance and to participate in governance. Risk of smart city, the main risk, as you can imagine, was invasion of privacy. But as you can see, even the mainland Chinese and the mixed group mentioned this. Their main worry about invasion of privacy was invasion of privacy from the private companies and the international companies, because they care only about profit. They care only about monitoring your speed in the traffic lights, if you have cameras across the road, in order to see if you have fast driving habits. Then you will get in your application, in your mobile phone, advertisements for buying a faster car, and they didn't like this. So that, like this customized advertisement by private companies. Data loss by computer virus, that was a main risk. Digital divide, that was mainly mentioned by the local participants, and had to do also with the situation of using smart tools to fight Live Home Safe, for example, to fight COVID, that the elderly and those who are not very well educated or do not own a mobile phone, they cannot get the benefits of these smart tools, smart elements. Others worried that the smart city will increase unemployment because people and employees will be replaced by robots. Digital systems, they are inflexible, they lack humanness, and they cannot make the best decisions for humans, and this was emphasized by those working in the private sector. Invasion of privacy and leakage of private information was also a problem. Mainland Chinese students thought that the citizens of Hong Kong will revolt against too much surveillance from smart city tools. Others mention unaccountability of authority, because when the government makes mistakes, and it can blame these mistakes on the utilization of smart elements. It was not our fault, it was the fault of the system. So they can use this now to be held accountable. And also a city that is relying totally on a digital system or a smart system, it will be very vulnerable in the case of an electronic war or a blackout, an electronic blackout. Now, this was also interesting here, trust in government or local companies or foreign companies. The mainland Chinese, they unconditionally trusted the government because it only does good to their citizens. Local companies would be trusted only if the government announced that they are trustworthy, and foreign companies only if they would be very, very well supervised by the government. The mixed group, as you can imagine, included participants from different areas, so some of them, they did not trust at all anyone for smart city, to develop smart city elements. Second part of the mixed group, they, again, probably those goes from the mainland China, they trust the government because they only do good to their citizens, their responsibility is to serve the citizens, and has great communication with foreign countries. The civil servants, it goes without saying that they trust the government, and the local companies if their privacy policies are acceptable and if they have good reputation. Private sector, again, two groups, some of them they didn't trust any at all. And some of them they didn't trust the government, especially because their system was outdated and the information can be easily stolen from these outdated systems from the government. Some of them mention as an example that the government is still using Internet Explorer, that the information from them can be easily stolen. I don't have much more time, so I will jump. Live home safe, I'm smart, and these elements of smart city, the mainland Chinese students, they were not very well aware about them. The mixed group, some of them trust all of them because of good legal framework, the personal data privacy ordinance from Hong Kong, and some of them also would trust these smart tools in special situations like in COVID-19. The civil servants, none of them would trust these elements, surprisingly, because the government has to gain the confidence of the citizens. Lessons, all of them agreed that Shenzhen, we brought Shenzhen as a comparative study, all of them agreed that Shenzhen is smarter than Hong Kong, and Hong Kong could learn from the garbage sorting system that is implemented in Shenzhen from 2011, from assigning different functions, different districts, one district for technology, another for commercial and this kind of things. Mature e-payment system, gaining higher public trust was also emphasized by the government. That's something that Hong Kong could learn from Shenzhen. Smart lampposts and so on and so forth. Sustainability was also mentioned, but nothing very interesting came from there. Messages to Hong Kong government, but they were interesting messages. One that struck my attention was that they suggested the government to pay some of these boy bands, the Canton Pop bands, to advertise the smart city elements so that the people can trust them more and use them more. Here are some. We also performed some word cloud on the 4 groups. We see that the word trust in the first group of the young Chinese students, it's much smaller, appeared less in the discussion than in the other groups. Trust, you can see here in the word frequency analysis, it often appear in all the discussions. Yes, I think I exceeded my time, and thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dionysios. So, well, the 3 absolutely fascinating presentations there, looking at different aspects of this trust and smart city agenda. So we have some time now for questions and comments and so on and so forth. Obviously, I have 1 or 2, but I'd like to open the opportunity for others to raise questions. So I'm going to try and also scroll across my screen and make sure I'm seeing anyone who is wishing to raise issues. But are there questions, comments that people would like to raise? You can either raise your hand visually and wave at the screen, or raise your virtual hand, please. Professor Masuru Yarime, got that right? Apologies.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm again very impressed by all the presentation this afternoon. I have a question to Dr. Daphne Ma about the large-scale project covering, I think, 600 households, and then try to use the data for energy consumption. I just wonder how you manage the data, in the sense that, do you have any kind of specific agreement with regard to who owns the data and then who has access to the data and then how you can use the data for maybe for different purposes. And so I just wonder how we are going to manage these kind of the data collection, data management, and data use.
Yeah, and yes, indeed, this is a very challenging task for our research project, and actually one of the core parts that we are taking very good care of, or at least we're trying our very best. So when we contact those households, we do ask them to sign a consent form, and on that we provide specific information, so which data will be collected, and then who owns this data, and we clearly state that this data will not be used for any commercial purposes. So I think we try to carefully deal with a couple of issues. We specify who owns the data, who can use the data, and who are going to manage the data, and when would those data be disposed of. So we make sure that these are clearly stated in our communication with the households, and then for our connection with the app supplier and all those smart sensor suppliers, we sign separate agreement with them. So our contract, my understanding is that it's quite different from those they used to sign with other business partners, because we have some specific kind of bottom line. So for example, for instance, they in the earlier version of those contracts from the app suppliers, they put down conditions that they can use those data for commercial purposes. And then there were after a couple of rounds of negotiation, then we finally took that condition out from our contract. So actually, we are still exploring how we can do the best of it. But I think as a research team based in the universities, then we got the backup from our legal advisor at HKBU. So we developed that set of data protocol and agreements with a very strong support from our legal team. And actually, our team is like the guinea pig in this area for our university. So that is how we are exploring the way forward in that way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a quick comment. Because this issue is not so, I think, not so easy for ordinary people to understand for the implications. And also, if you try to use the data you collected and then try to use it for different purposes, and then probably it's not very practical to get approval or consent from the citizens each time when you try to use for different purposes, for example. So in that sense, probably the trust will be important in the sense that maybe well, obviously we need to have a consent in some way, but we need to think about how practically and also in a feasible way that we can get kind of consent without really asking them each time or asking them to do something quite complex on their side. So this is just a kind of my thought at this stage.
Yeah, fully agree. Just a quick feedback is that we are producing a short video on data trust. So it's like 30 seconds or 1 minute. So we, in a way, help our participants understand what we're doing and what kind of trust issue that we're dealing with. Okay, thank you for your question.
Great, thanks to both of you for that. Okay, I will, as we have a brief hiatus in questions at the moment, I wonder if I could ask one of each of our presenters. I mean, we've each talked about some really interesting work and some contrasting and different types of data and findings. I wonder if, what would be overall the most surprising thing that you found thus far in this work that each of you have been doing? I'll have to take you in a slightly different order how we had before. So maybe Kris, if you could go first. I mean, what in all of this work on trust and smart city is the most surprising thing that you've come across thus far?
Oh, that's a great question, Roger. I think the survey revealed that there was higher trust in the technology itself, it seems, than there was in the governance of the technology or in the policy aspects around the technology. And that is, depending on your perspective, may or may not be that surprising. I was mildly surprised by that because I think that in the public sector context and the political context, trust in the government itself can be a mediating factor in trust in the technology itself. And I think that is, it's very tempting to compare these results to what we might expect around in other parts of the world. So let's take the United States, for example. I think we're all aware that there are big political divisions in the US right now. And with Elon Musk's supposed purchase of Twitter in the past few days, whether that'll go through, who knows. But the technology, or at least applications of technology firms, or it depends on where we put the boundary of technology, right? The trust in that has been a bit of an issue in the US. For example, some people feeling that their views have been marginalized by various sorts of content control algorithms and things like that. But then again, also, and that sort of trust in maybe like technology firms, as opposed to maybe trust in governance of technology. The other thing I would say is that, somebody had mentioned street lamps. There was that episode in which some of the protesters had torn down the street lamp. And sometimes I use that photo. It's really quite illustrative. That seems to portray kind of a distrust in the mechanics, the actual mechanics of the technology. Is it the distrust in the technology itself, or is it distrust in the governance behind the technology? Some of that's a little bit difficult to parse out, but it seems as though people were distrustful of the tech itself, of its ability to surveil, to gather data, et cetera. So I guess what I've seen here and also in Singapore is fairly optimistic view of the tech itself, and that respondents appear to be able to separate in their minds, their trust of the tech from their trust in the governance of it, which is a good development for people continuing to do research and empirical research on this.
Yes, sorry, my screen just froze there for a second. Dionysios, what's the most surprising thing, would you say, that you found in the focus group, or maybe the most surprising thing that somebody said, or something like that?
Yes, thank you. Many surprising things. For 4 hours, we listened to different opinions, various opinions. What was most surprising was the gap in the perceptions about trust, about government, between those with mainland Chinese background and local Hong Kongers without much Chinese influence, and also between those working for the government, civil servants, and those working for the private sector, but to a lesser extent, not to that large extent. I mentioned some surprising, some really observations during my presentations. It was very interesting. Everything that the government was doing, the Chinese government was doing, was trustworthy. It was okay, because the government only cares about the benefit of the people. It doesn't have any malicious purposes. While the private companies, being American, being Chinese, being European, they only care about profit, about making profit, and use us, the consumers of the smart technology, to gain more money. And that was imprinted in their head, and they couldn't take it out of their head. Public good, private bad. Yeah, that was one of the most interesting observations. Other things, well, about the Leave Home Safe, okay, we do not have the names of the participants, only numbers, no, not the names of the participants, so everything was confidential. But you know, some of them said that they use 2 mobile phones in order to skip, you know, scanning the Leave Home Safe app when they go in the restaurant. So they use a mobile phone without a SIM card to avoid having the government knowing their whereabouts. Yeah, this kind of interesting observations. They were all very interesting discussions.
Good. Thanks very much. And Daphne, most surprising finding for you?
Yeah, I think it's we kind of sense that trust can be very powerful, and with our research in data trust, we see that data trust can reverse power relationship among the stakeholders in energy field in a couple of important aspects. Number one is that traditional residential end users like you and me, we are relatively passive, and then but with good energy data, we can be more proactive. That means that power companies have to be more responsive to our needs and that sort of thing. And the second dimension is that we see that even between government and power company and like academics, that issue of information asymmetry has been existing, at least in Hong Kong, as what we can see. So now with data trust, we are shifting the data accessibility from the power company to community or to more local stakeholders. So it means that gradually, when we build up a better data set, we will be more powerful in this sort of negotiation with power companies or even with the Hong Kong government. So I think that is also an important part of data trust, as we can see. And then very interestingly, because our project, we invite Hon Chi Association, which is a school kind of educational group that provide education service for underprivileged students. So with those sorts of solar data that we are creating with those kids, then we kind of bring them out to their community, offering some like services to their community. So it's kind of reverse that sort of negative relationship between local residents to these underprivileged kids. So I think kind of reversing the power relationship among stakeholders, one of the most surprising observations that we can see from our team.
Great, thanks very much for that, Daphne. I would like to say, I'm sure on behalf of all of us as chair, thanks very much to Daphne, to Kris, and to Dionysios for 3 absolutely fascinating presentation sets of research results. I feel I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure everyone else has as well. So thanks very much to them.
Professor Paul wants to make.
I just want to. No, I was just going to say that the 3 papers were great. Thanks very, very much to all of you. I was just going to compliment one or 2 things that Dionysios had said on the focus groups, but maybe we'll leave that for another occasion. You know, I mean, it's been a great session. Thanks to all of you. Very, very interesting things. The only thing I would say about the focus groups was that what was so interesting, as well as was actually the deliberative aspect. Because the actual collective interview aspect of the focus groups was really, really interesting. You know, it did allow the various positions, particularly in the more mixed groups. It sort of, you saw how juries worked. It did allow certain propositions to emerge from deliberation amongst the members in the groups, and that was actually a very, very interesting dimension. It wasn't just that they were, obviously the 4 groups were different, but they converged in some quite interesting ways, which we could talk about if we had a bit more time. But I mean, so that was great. Thanks, Dionysios. I really like the 2 papers, incidentally. Daphne's obviously work I've been following closely. Kris, that was very, very interesting paper, quite close to some of the things we found really in our survey. And I think the wicked problems are very, very wicked, and they're very difficult to solve. But I think it's a nice way to express this notion of smart city. So thanks to all of you for taking the time.
Thank you.